Hello everyone, welcome to Classroom TV. Today I am going to talk about plant cell for class 8. So what are the different parts of a plant cell? So this is a plant cell. We have discussed about cell in detail in the initial classes. In case you have missed it, you can check it out in classroomtv.in. So today in this class, we are going to cover the topics of what are the parts of the plant cell, how is it different from the animal cell, and after that we are going to talk about each of every part of the cell in detail. We are not going to talk about the cell organelle, we are going to talk about like the plant is green in color, right? Why? What does it have? And how is it going to make its own food? And is it completely that plant is dependent on sunlight, or what is it that is required for the plant to make its own food? Then we are going to cover the topics like how the transport of food is being done in plants and how transport of water is being done. What are the vascular tissues that are present in the plant? And then we are going to talk about how that end product is used when it's consumed by humans or animals, and we are also going to talk about the process of fermentation. So today we are going to talk about photosynthesis, transpiration, translocation, vascular tissues involved, and fermentation. Alright, so let's begin. So here these are the parts of the plant cell. The main parts of the plant cell are mitochondria, vacuole, green color pigment that is called as chloroplast. So remember, first, in general, when you see any plant cell and an animal cell, the main difference you notice is animal cell does not have cell wall, whereas plant cell has a rigid cell wall. Alright, so the plant cell has a rigid cell wall, and the cell wall is made up of cellulose. Alright, so the plant has a rigid cell wall. Now we'll talk about the nucleus. So here you can see the nucleus. This is the second important part of the plant. Alright, then we have vacuole. Vacuole is mainly for storage purpose, and let me tell you a striking difference between a plant cell and an animal cell. In an animal cell, what happens is the vacuoles are smaller in size and sometimes it can be absent, but as in plant cell it's not so. Alright. Then we have green colored pigment called chloroplast, and the function of chloroplast is it is used in photosynthesis. Alright. Then we have mitochondria, we have mitochondria, which is powerhouse, and then we have rough endoplasmic reticulum, which has protein spikes on them. So these are the important parts that you need to remember. So what are the important parts that you need to remember of the plant? That plant has a rigid cell wall and it is made up of cellulose. Then you need to remember about nucleus. It is the main organ that stores the information. Then mitochondria is important. Then we have chloroplast that gives the green color to the plant. Then we have vacuoles which act as storage. Alright, so these are the important parts of the plant that you need to remember. Okay, now in general, if you see plants, they are green in color, right? But let me ask you a question. Did you come across a plant that's purple, yellow, orange, different colors? Did you come across such a plant? Maybe yes. So I told you that chloroplast is the pigment that is responsible for giving the green color, right? So do you think that those particular plants do not have chlorophyll in them? They do not have chloroplast is what you think. So let me tell you something. The pigment, that green color is coming from chloroplast. Similarly, the yellow plants also have the green color in them, but it is dominated by a different color. So what do I mean is, if you see a yellow plant, it's yellow because the content, the chloroplast, the green colored pigment is less in a quantity. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Alright, that's why we have different colors of plants. Now you see such a small plant, right? How does that plant grow into completely big tree? How is it possible? And let me tell you something. It is able to grow into the height that it can grow because of the continuous process of photosynthesis, where the plant is able to make its own food. Alright. So, what is photosynthesis? Now, photosynthesis occurs in plants because they can make their own food. Now, how does this plant makes its own food is in presence of sunlight. So, this is the light energy that is coming from the sun and carbon dioxide that we give out. And water that is coming from the roots. We have oxygen and glucose as end products. All right. Now, let me tell you something. This process happens in leaf because it has chlorophyll. So, this plant can make its own food in presence of sunlight, carbon dioxide and water. So, water, we are watering the plant, so water is coming from the roots. Where is carbon dioxide coming from? So, we take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide, right? So, we take in oxygen and we give out carbon dioxide. So, that carbon dioxide which is released by animals and humans is what this plant is going to convert into oxygen. That's why in general when we destroy plants, when we are urbanizing our society by making sure that we are cutting the plants, what are we really doing is we are making good buildings, but then at the end of the day we are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. Now what happens because of that? So, the oxygen level decreases because if there is no carbon dioxide, the plant can't make its own food, and if there are no plants, then there's no oxygen. So, eventually it will lead to global warming and we might not even survive for more amount of time. So, that's why even though if you're in apartments and like you don't have farms or like big garden space, you can always grow tiny plants, potted plants, still they increase the amount of oxygen in the air and they purify the air. Alright, that's why people plant trees. The reason is they help in clearing up our carbon dioxide into oxygen. Alright, so that's where we are getting the carbon dioxide from. So, sun is going to give light energy in presence of carbon dioxide, and the water that we provide to the roots, the plant is going to make its own food, and this food is the food which we use as raw material when we eat it. As the plant is able to make its own food, this type of nutrition is called as autotrophic nutrition. Alright. So, plants can make their own food. That's why the mode of nutrition is called autotrophic nutrition. Alright. Now, imagine that this plant is growing. So, if this part of the plant is not exposed to sunlight, so we are saying for the plant to make its own food, we always need sunlight, right? So, suppose if this is a plant and this part of the plant is not exposed to sunlight, how do you think that part of the plant will get food and water? Because only the plants that are exposed to sun can make its own food. So, how do you think that part will get? So, for this to understand, you need to know that diffusion happens in small plants, alright. So, what is diffusion? Now, when gas and oxygen mixes together, that's also a process of diffusion. So, I'll give you an easy example, alright. So, you might notice when you are coming across a bakery or a restaurant, you will feel the flavors of pasta or chocolate cake or like the cake baking, you will know the smell, right? But the same thing, if you see a cold cake in your home or a cold curry or a cold lunch, you would not even know the difference. So what happens exactly is, whenever there is food that is heated up, all right, so when a food is heated up, then there is aromatic gas molecules released in the air, all right. So these aromatic molecules, when they combine with oxygen in air, is when you can get that smell, all right. And then you will notice that yum. So you'll be like, it's a cake that's being baking, all right. Similarly, if suppose there is a cold cake, you can't smell. So that is the reason what happens when you fly, when you are going for a long distance in any flight, you'll notice that no matter which airline you go, the food tastes horrible. I mean, it doesn't taste exactly like how it tastes in restaurant. Why? So what happens when you fly is, suppose this is it looks like a fish, but actually I'm trying to draw a aeroplane. So imagine that this is a flight, all right. So when you're flying, the air pressure difference will be there. All right. What happens is, when you are not at a higher level, then the temperature is little humid. But when you go, when you are at a higher atmospheric pressure, what happens is the humidity is less. So your mouth and nose becomes dried up. So whenever the mouth is dried up, you wouldn't feel the taste difference. Or like what do I mean by that is, you need to feel the smell in order to appreciate the food. Then like you will know the taste. So you will lose the sensation of taste when you're flying. All right, that's the reason. Okay, so this mixing of air over here is called as diffusion. So passage of air, all right. So if this part is not exposed to sun, but this part is exposed to sun, it will exchange through the process of diffusion. But let me ask you guys a question. Suppose if that plant is not a small plant, 1 feet plant, it's like 100 feet, a tree, then how do you think that tree is going to make its own food? So it definitely needs to make its own food. It definitely needs water to survive, because the moment it doesn't have water, it would die. So what happens exactly is, plants have a unique transportation system for transporting water, and they have a unique system for transporting food. All right. So the system, the vascular tissue that helps in transportation of water is xylem. All right. So what is xylem? Xylem is a vascular tissue that helps in transportation of water. All right. And what is phloem? Phloem is also a vascular tissue that helps in transportation of food and minerals. So let me tell you something. So this is the xylem vessel and this is the phloem vessel. So what happens is, when you are trying to transport water, all right, in us, what is the transport system that we have? That's the blood, and the pumping is being done by the heart. Plant doesn't require a heart, all right, it just needs xylem to transport water, and it needs phloem to transport food and minerals. And now how does this thing really happen? So what happens is, in the plants you have xylem vessels. Initially they also have nucleus, cell membrane and everything, cell wall, all of it. When they are growing up, okay, when the plant is growing, it completely becomes dead and it falls a passage. So always remember, if suppose this is the huge tree, now these are the roots. Alright. So how should the water go? The water will be transported from unidirectional, that is the water flows from roots to all parts of the plant, right? It is unidirectional. So who helps in it is the xylem. So xylem initially has all kinds of cells, but then later it becomes empty so as to support the flow of water. Alright, now coming to phloem cells. Phloem cells always have companion cells beside them. Alright, so what do they have? They have companion cells attached to them. So companion cells means nothing but the cells that are like a partner. Alright, so phloem cells are living, whereas xylem cells are dead cells. Alright, and phloem helps in transport of food and minerals. Okay, so I'll give you another example. So here phloem needs to transport food and minerals. So it's not unidirectional, it's multidirectional because it needs to transport food and water to every part of the plant. Let it be here, let it be here, let it be anywhere. So it needs to transport through all directions. Now suppose think in this part of the plant there is lot of sugar. Alright, in this part of the plant there is lot of sugar, and in this part of the plant there is less sugar. So what happens exactly? How do you think this part of the plant will get food? So what happens is, as we know, this is the phloem inside, but think that this is the phloem, companion cells. What will happen is the sugar first enters the phloem, that is companion cells, and then enters the phloem. Then it will start bulging up. So simple, if this is the sugar which is there in more quantity in that particular part of the plant. So first it enters the companion cells and then the phloem, and it bulges up because now phloem has more sugar over there. It needs to transport it over here. Okay. So when it bulges up, the adjacent xylem will give water to it so that it will pass easily. So let me explain you more clearly. So this is the xylem and this is the phloem. Alright. So and phloem always has companion cells. Okay. Phloem always have companion cells. Now what happens is, here there is lot of sugar and here there is no sugar in the part of the plant. So this sugar first enters companion cells, then enters the phloem cell by itself. After it enters, it bulges up. So then this adjacent xylem will give the water, and that bulge decreases and the sugars come down to the part wherever it is required. So this is how they both go hand in hand for transport of food, water and minerals. Alright. So I hope you're clear. So how is the sugar transported? So first I have given you an example that here there is lot of sugar. Then what happens? This is the companion cells, and suppose this is the phloem cells and this is the xylem cell. Alright. So this is xylem and this is phloem and this is companion cells. Now the sugar content is more over here in this part of the plant, and here sugar content is less. Then how is the food transported to here is, the food first goes to companion cells and enters phloem cells. Then it starts bulging up. So the water from the xylem goes to this portion and make sure that the water will make the food flow and reach the part wherever it is required. So this is the process of how the food is transferred. So first, wherever the sugar is more, it will first go to the companion cell, enter the phloem cell, and it bulges up. And when it bulges up, the water from the xylem comes and enters, and then it will make the process easy by just making the food flow down to the point wherever it is needed. So now I hope you guys understand how food is being transported. Alright. So let us see about one more structure, that is xylem, phloem. We have already discussed, but there's one more structure, stomata, which we need to talk about. But first let's be done with xylem and phloem. Xylem and phloem are the vascular tissues and they transport vessels that combine to form a vascular bundle in higher order plants. The vascular bundles function to connect tissues in roots, stems, leaves as well as they provide structural support. Now xylem, what is the process through which how the xylem is able to work? That process is called transpiration. Alright, it transports water and minerals from roots to aerial parts of the plant and it's unidirectional. So, it is single directional, downward to upward direction because we are watering the roots. So, water goes from roots to all parts of the plant. Alright. Xylem occupy the innermost portion of the vascular bundle and it is composed of vessel elements and tracheids. Alright. Then vessel wall consists of fused cells that create a continuous tube for the flow of material. So, it is like a tube like structure so that there is continuous flow. So, the water flow will always be from downward to upward direction and they are always composed of dead tissues. Okay. Examples are wood and rennin and gum. Alright. Now, let us talk about phloem. Phloem moves material via the process of active translocation. So, transpiration means xylem, alright, that is how the water is being transported. Translocation means how food and minerals from one part are reaching other part. I have explained you with the example of how, suppose now again I will explain the same example. Here, the portion of the plant has lot of sugar. Here, there is no sugar. Now, if the phloem has to transport food from here to here, this process is called translocation because the location is changing, right? So, who does that? Phloem does that, but with the help of xylem. So, this is the phloem and this is the xylem. So, the sugar first enters the phloem and bulges up. The xylem, it will give water to the phloem so that both of them flow down and reach to the point where the food is necessary to be transported. Okay, so this process is called transportation and it is bidirectional. So, the food and minerals are transported wherever it is necessary. Alright. Phloem occupy the outermost vascular bundle and it has sieve tube elements and companion cells. And they are composed of living tissue. However, sieve tubes lack nuclei and other organelles. So, these are the sieve tubes. Okay. So, let us see the difference between the xylem and phloem. Xylem transports waters and minerals, phloem only food and minerals, alright. And then here no end wall between cells, there are end walls that is called as sieve plates. So, these are the sieve plates that you see in the diagram. Alright, let me just make it more easy for you. So, here you can see the sieve plates on the screen. So, here you cannot see any sieve plates. So, no end walls between cells and it is one way, that is from the roots to all parts of the plant. So, it is unidirectional and this is two-way movement. Wherever it is needed, the food will be transported, alright. And outer cells are not living. So, this is the outermost cell, it is not living. Whereas, here cells are living but then they need support. So, now I hope you know the difference between xylem and phloem. Xylem and phloem both are living tissues, alright. And then I just wantedly said that so that you are still with me. Both are vascular tissues, they are not living tissues. Xylem is a living tissue or a dead tissue. Can you answer? Xylem is a dead tissue, phloem is a living tissue. Both xylem and phloem are examples of vascular tissue, but xylem, you can see by the diagram, this is the wood. Remember, xylem is dead cells, alright. Xylem helps in transportation of water, phloem helps in transportation of food and minerals. Xylem has outermost cells that is dead and they are living cells but they need support, and xylem transports water unidirectional, that is from downward to upward movement, whereas in phloem it is both ways, and in xylem there are no end walls between cells, whereas in phloem there are, and that is in the form of sieve plates. Alright. So, translocation is the movement of organic compounds, that is sugar and amino acids, from sources to wherever it is needed. Alright, and organic compounds are transported from source to sinks via a vascular tube system, that is phloem. Alright, and even the companion cells are helping in this whole process. So, do not forget the companion cells when it comes to phloem. Sugars are principally transported as sucrose because it is soluble but metabolically inert. So, they are initially transported as sucrose, and the nutrient rich viscous fluid of the phloem is called as plant sap. So, the food is nothing but the plant sap, alright. So, here you can see that who is synthesizing food over here? The green color portion is like, leaf is like kitchen for photosynthesis. That is how you should remember. Kitchen is the place where you make your food, right? So, here kitchen means leaf. That is where photosynthesis occurs, alright. And what is the phloem then? They are nothing but storage organs. They are seeds and roots. So, where is the food? The thick liquid that is stored is nothing but storage organ, seeds and roots. Like for example, let me show you if I have a diagram of that. Okay. So, roots, like for example carrots. Carrots is nothing but the food, right? It is also where the food is stored for the plant. That is what we are eating also, alright. So, phloem sap can be storage organs, seeds and roots. Now, let us talk about phloem more in detail. What are the sieve elements? What are the companion cells? Phloem sieve tubes are primarily composed of two types of cells. One is sieve element cells and companion cells. So, you saw that phloem has something called sieve cells, which are basically like a filter, and companion cells. Alright, so these are the companion cells and these are the sieve plates. Okay. The phloem also contains clerenchymal and parenchymal cell which fill additional spaces and provide support. Sieve element cells. Now, we are going to talk about sieve cells first and then companion cells. Sieve elements are long and narrow cells that are connected to each other to form a sieve tube. Sieve elements are connected by sieve plates at end of their transverse ends. So, if this is sieve element, this is the sieve plate. Sieve elements have no nuclei, so they are living but they need support. Alright. The sieve elements also have thick and rigid cell wall to withstand hydrostatic pressure that facilitate the flow. They do have cell wall, but they do not have nucleus. Alright. Companion cells provide metabolic support for sieve element cells and facilitate loading and unloading of materials. I have explained about the phloem companion cells in detail. So, these are the companion cells and these are the sieve cells and these are the sieve plates. Alright. So, companion cells, if suppose here the food is there, it needs to be transported to here where the food is less. That happens only through the companion cells. So, they play a major role in loading and unloading of substances. Alright. So, xylem and phloem vessels are grouped into bundles that exist from root to shoot in the vascular plants. So, we have also studied the differences between both of the xylem and phloem, and they vary from type to type, if it is a monocotyledon or a dicotyledon. Xylem and phloem vessels can usually be differentiated by the diameter of their cavity because they both pretty much look like this. Xylem have a large cavity, alright, that is how you need to remember. Xylem has large cavities, alright. Now, coming to anaerobic respiration. Before I talk about this, let me tell you this process. So, at the end of photosynthesis, what did we have? We had C6H12O6 plus oxygen as the end products, right? These are photosynthesis end products. So, what happens to this is when consumers eat. So who are consumers? We are consumers. Animals are consumers. So there are two kinds, producers, consumers. Producers are plants because they can make their own food. So the type of nutrition followed there is autotrophic nutrition. Whereas animals are consumers because they depend on other animals for their own food. Alright. And when they eat, what happens is this glucose is broken down. Alright. So when a human, suppose, eats a leaf, a spinach, so there is, okay, so there is glucose inside that leaf. Now what happens is when we eat the food, who helps in the breakdown of the food? Digestive system. But who gives energy is ATP. So this is basically like a raw material. This glucose is useless till it enters our body, and then in presence or absence of oxygen, there is a process called as glycolysis. Alright. So this process will break down the glucose in our body, inside our body. Alright. So first it will be converted into pyruvate, then it will be converted in presence of oxygen or in the absence of oxygen into carbon dioxide, water and energy, or it can be converted into ethanol and water, but very little energy. Okay, this only happens in yeast, and in humans, in absence of oxygen, there is lactic acid formed. So I'll be talking about this now in detail. So first of all, what did we learn? At the end of photosynthesis, the light energy is converted into chemical energy. But now how is this chemical energy useful to us? Alright, so this food when we eat, suppose I am eating a broccoli or a spinach or a cauliflower or anything, alright, for me to get energy, for me to talk like this or like do my daily activities, I need energy. And how am I getting this energy is by the breakdown of glucose. So the breakdown of glucose is called as glycolysis. The breakdown of glucose is called glycolysis. So first a pyruvate, which is just a molecule, is formed, and then it is divided into two types. So it is divided based on presence of oxygen or absence of oxygen. At the end, the thing that is giving us energy is ATP. Alright. So how are we getting energy? That is because of ATP. So what happens inside a cell is, so first this is our cell, alright, and this is mitochondria. So our cell has oxygen and our cell also has glucose. So this glucose and oxygen enter the mitochondria, and there this reaction happens. Okay, so the glucose combines with oxygens and gives ATP. Where is it happening? It is happening in mitochondria. Alright. And what is the full form of ATP? ATP is called as adenosine triphosphate. And mitochondria is called powerhouse of the cell, because without that we cannot do anything. Alright. This is actually a process of respiration. You might think respiration is just taking in oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. No. Respiration is actually breaking down of this glucose into, let it be pyruvate, and then how in presence of oxygen ATP is released, or in the absence of oxygen, what is that type of respiration. So the process that occurs in presence of oxygen is called as aerobic respiration, and the process that occurs in absence of oxygen is called as anaerobic respiration. So what happens and where is this happening? So this oxygen and glucose will enter the mitochondria and give ATP. So therefore mitochondria is called as powerhouse of cell. But in some cases, like in yeast, there is no oxygen. So the pyruvate which is there, it will be just converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide. Alright. So let me show you something. So glucose is converted into pyruvate. Now pyruvate will be converted into carbon dioxide, water and 36 ATP in presence of oxygen. And in absence of oxygen, these all will be happening. So this process is called as fermentation, where we are using anaerobic respiration as the base. Alright, and it is actually useful to make many substances that we use in cooking, like soy sauce, cheese, yogurt, beer. Beer is made by fermenting, wine and bread. The rising of the bread is nothing but fermentation. So let us talk about anaerobic respiration and how it is used in our day-to-day life. Anaerobic respiration involves the breakdown of carbohydrates in absence of oxygen. So here oxygen is not present. In yeast, fermentation results in production of ethanol and carbon dioxide, which can be used in food processing. So we have C6H12O6 as the end product, which is converted into pyruvate, right? This is glucose. So when it enters the organisms, that is let it be animal or yeast or anything, in absence of oxygen, what happens? It is converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide. So this ethanol evaporates, but that carbon dioxide is used for raising the bread. So carbon dioxide causes the dough to rise and ethanol evaporates during the baking, and that's how the bread is made. Alcohol. Ethanol is the intoxicating agent in alcoholic beverages that we use, and then when the concentration is approximately 14%, it is enough to damage the yeast. So what happens exactly, how we are using this is, in baking, we make sure that ethanol evaporates and we use the carbon dioxide to make the bread. Whereas in alcohol making, we make sure that we are damaging the yeast and keeping the ethanol. And from there we create the intoxicating agent. So fermentation is the process basically that is commercialized for making of bread and alcohol. Alright, bacterial cultures can also undergo fermentation to provide a variety of food products, that is yogurt and cheese. You might be having them in general, you might not be aware also that actually they are nothing but the products made because of fermentation, that is probiotics, like you might have had a probiotic milk or a probiotic yogurt. So bacteria produce lactic acid anaerobically, which modifies milk proteins to generate yogurt and cheese. Now I want to ask you guys a question. Fermentation that is done because, and then you get bread, you get cheese, you get like yogurt. You make yogurt because of lactic acid, right? Which is again by the process of fermentation only. Do you think it's safe to consume these fermented foods? Like, are you sure that it's not bad for your health? Actually, what happens is these bacteria will make sure that when this fermentation process is happening, the fermented foods which you eat, they are easy to digest, and they actually produce, the fermented foods have enzymes which are good for our health. And you know something, these fermented bacteria, like the fermented foods in general, they actually destroy the lactose. They don't have lactose. So the food which we eat are actually not having lactose. I am talking about fermented food. So what am I trying to explain is, fermented foods do not have lactose in them. So it's a very good option for lactose intolerant people. So some people cannot even take lactose, they get sick. So for such people, fermented food is absolutely works fine. Alright, and it also eases the process of digestion. So these are the two benefits of having fermented food, that is lactose intolerant people can consume it and it is easy to digest. So that is all about anaerobic respiration and the uses in industry, how it is used to make different kinds of food. So this was about today's topic, how the plant cell, each part of the plant cell, how it is used to make its food, and then when we eat the same food, how is it getting changed inside our body and what are the benefits. Alright, so let's have a quick recap so that you have a clear understanding, and before I wrap up the class, I want to give a brief summary about the stomata also. So stomata are nothing but the guard cells. Alright, so in the leaf you can see kidney bean shaped structures. These are called as stomata. Stomata are also called as guard cells because they guard the leaves. So what happens is during the summer there is not much water in the plant. So what does these guard cells do is they remain closed. They don't let the water come out. Alright. But during rainy season when there is lot of water, these guard cells open up and then they cause the water to go out. Alright. So when it is summer, when leaves are dried up, the stomata becomes closed. When it's rainy and it wants to get rid of excess water, it opens up. So not just water, stomata helps in water and gas exchange. Alright. So let me ask you guys a question. Did you notice leaves have dewy, glassy appearance early in the morning? That is nothing but the stomata has opened up and there is water that is coming out of the guard cells. And this process is called as evaporation. So when there is loss of water from the plants, that process is called evaporation. So what is evaporation? Evaporation is nothing but loss of water from the plant. Alright. And do you know something? The water that is there in the whole plant system, 95% evaporates, only 5% is used for the process of photosynthesis. So remember, only 5% of the water is used for photosynthesis. So now let's just wrap the chapter. So I have told you about the plant cell structure, what are the important parts. It has cell wall, the rigid cell wall, it's made up of cellulose, it has nucleus, mitochondria, chloroplast which is like the kitchen for photosynthesis, and vacuoles for the purpose of storage. And then we studied about photosynthesis where the light energy is converted into chemical energy and oxygen in presence of carbon dioxide, water and chlorophyll. Then the transport of the water and the food happens because of vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. Xylem is a dead tissue, phloem is a living tissue but it lacks nucleus, so it needs support. Xylem is unidirectional because it transports water only one way, from downward to upward, whereas phloem, it is multidirectional. Wherever it is needed, it transports the food. So the process of transporting water is called transpiration, that occurs because of xylem, and the transport of food happens in phloem, that is called translocation. And this process is possible because of companion cells in phloem. Alright. Then we also have sieve plates and sieve tubes in phloem, but they lack nucleus, so they are not very well developed. They definitely need help, they need support. And then we studied about stomata, which are the openings, pore-like openings that are present on the leaf, mainly for food and water exchange. Okay. Then we have studied that the source for photosynthesis is leaf. Everything happens in the leaf, but the sap, that is the nutrient rich liquid, it is stored, that has carbohydrate, is stored in the storage organs, seeds and roots. Alright. Then I have told you that glucose which is there in the plants, when we consume it, what happens? Everything happens inside the cell, basically inside the mitochondria. So the glucose and the oxygen combine together in us. So that's why we have aerobic respiration. Whereas in yeast, there is a different kind of respiration happening in absence of oxygen, that is called as anaerobic respiration. So in aerobic respiration, what is happening exactly? The glucose undergoes a process that is called as glycolysis, that it breaks down into a molecule called pyruvate. In presence of oxygen, tremendous energy is released, ATP is released in mitochondria. That is why ATP is very important, because it gives us energy, and so mitochondria is called powerhouse of the cell. Whereas in yeast, what happens is pyruvate does not change into carbon dioxide and water, whereas it changes into ethanol and carbon dioxide. Alright, and that is used in making of bread and wine. So in bread we use carbon dioxide and make sure that the ethanol is evaporated, whereas in making of alcohol we use the ethanol and get rid of carbon dioxide. So these are the different purposes of fermentation. There is one more thing. Like sometimes when you do tremendous exercise, it might take time for the oxygen to reach that cell in your body. That time what happens is you get like cramps. You feel like a catch in your muscle. That is because of lactic acid accumulation. So that is an anaerobic respiration that's happening in your body, which is temporary, but it happens because it takes time for the oxygen to reach that cell. So this is the other type of mechanism that happens. So now I hope you understood why mitochondria is called powerhouse of the cell. So I hope you have a clear understanding on everything about the plant cell, also what are the each parts of the cell, and why is stomata important, and why is mitochondria important, and what is this translocation and transpiration happening inside the plant. So I'm hoping that you have understood everything, and in case you did not understand, you can always leave your query by logging in into classroomtv.in. And also in case you have missed previous episode, do not worry, you can always access by going to classroomtv.in, where you can have access to previous videos as well as study materials and tests. So thanks for watching Classroom TV, and stay tuned to Classroom TV for more videos. Thank you.